Okay, Wadamuli, Yama, and noting our various time zones, good morning, good day, and good evening. At the outset, I'd like to take a moment as we commence the 2021 Mediation Awareness Week event with the acknowledgement that we gather here across this continent on the stolen lands of the world's original First Nations peoples. I make this statement without reservation or exception. This morning, I acknowledge that we in Australia are also being joined by peers, colleagues, learners, contributors, and educators across the globe. I am Linda. I am a Birragubba and Kamilaroi woman. My people are your people and are the oldest original continuing culture on this planet. As a First Nations woman, a mother, a lawyer, an academic, a policy reformist, and in the many other capacities I use as vehicles to contribute, I stand before you today as my ancestors have done for many thousands of years before me. I continue their welcomes. I acknowledge and respect your presence and the richness of difference you each bring, everyone, each one of you, as visitors to our many sacred homelands, both in person and in this contemporary virtual context. To my brothers and sisters in culture and in law, I see you. As we all know, difference, alternative perspectives, varied interpretations, diverse ways of being, doing, and interpreting sit at the very, very heart of our mediation practice. My people, First Peoples, are products of an oral cultural tradition. We are hardwired for complicated, multifaceted solution creation. Our survival history, our modern present existence, and our sustainable futures are illustrated in our story. Our laws, our societal expectations, our Black ethics, guiding our obligations and responsibilities, our community politics of being. Our cultural principles have been tried and tested over the millennia, weathered with use, moulded and fashioned by need and adaptation. They are our cultural principles. They continue to sustain our true cultural selves and access our many communities. As First Nations people, we bring with us generations of tenure, varying experiences, alternative viewpoints, diverse heightened expectations, but we also bring with us difference, not deficit. Our societal frameworks, our difference has nurtured and sustained us for near on 80,000 years. Our First Nations problem-solving DNA, our complex negotiation skills, and our ability to adapt has assured and will continue to assure we survive and thrive. Collectively, all of us here, as facilitators, peacekeepers, equity advocates, and mediators, provide services and our practices offer to provide amplification and safety for the voices of those ordinarily silenced. Respect and explore differing value sets and find amicable alignment to respect differences in approach through equitable access, solutions provided to assist with individual and collectively crafted solutions. As mediators more generally, each of us hold a position of immense responsibility. We are obligated both morally and via our fiduciary duties to be genuine and professional in our undertakings, to make time, full time, available to accommodate the extended realities of First Nations decision-making and conflict resolution. Never force an agreement as a result of time duress. Ensure we are appropriately qualified, tenured, and informed to engage with parties impacted by unsolicited trauma. Know that revisiting trauma is too often a physical re-experience of that event, not just recall. Trauma includes the intergenerational trauma inflicted through colonial tools of state oppression and the persisting of legacy relationships. We must authentically guide and be respectful and be productive with dialogue. undertake to preserve the best possible relationship between our parties, and accept the power we have to support positive, just outcomes. When our mediation practice purports to support First Nations decision-making and conflict resolution, we must do our cultural due diligence. We must be culturally principled practitioners. We must acknowledge this is a highly specialised skill set. A failure to do so risks re-traumatising those already broken and understandably untrusting. Just bear in mind, the tools of the master will never dismantle the master's house. Again, the tools of the master will never dismantle the master's house. Each of you standing on our traditional timeless homelands of these ancient First Peoples, I support your genuine, culturally principled successes. I trust you each create immeasurable mindful differences in the lives of your parties. I wish each of you safe passage, and I ask that you all respect, revere, and stand in awe of the original conciliators, the original peacemakers, our communities, kin, and country. Tread lightly as you go. Thank you.
You're muted, Joanne.
Thank you. Linda, thank you very much for setting the tone and starting our conference so beautifully and powerfully. I'm coming today from the land of the Kuranai Gunai people in southeast Gippsland, and also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of Australia and pay respects to our elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the continued connections to our lands, waters and community. This year's topic for the International Mediation Awareness Week is mediation and culture, and it's going to be a theme throughout Australia and the world, looking at how, as mediators, we fit into helping to, I suppose, support and improve cultures in our various communities. The week will end with a debate on the topic of whether the Western mediation model is appropriate for the world, I guess. But anyway, I'm Joanne Law. I'm the Australian host for the International Mediation Awareness Week, and I'm very shortly going to be introducing you to our keynote speaker, Venita Dimos. Before I do, I just need to remind you of a few house rules. The sessions are being recorded, so please make sure you've turned off your camera and audio. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the talk, so Venita's going to try and reserve maybe 10 or 15 minutes to allow answers to questions. So please use the chat to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll bring those out for Venita at the end. And if you do drop off, please log back in and we'll let you in. So don't be worried about that. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to Venita Dimos. Venita is a recognised specialist and thought leader in conflict management and communication. She's a lawyer, nationally accredited mediator, conflict dynamics practitioner, family dispute resolution practitioner, professional coach, and the founder and director of the mediation company. She's trained in a wide variety of approaches, including conflict dynamics profiling, synergy conflict management, brain-based combination skills, brain-based coaching, and with the High Conflict Institute, New Ways for Families, and also accelerated rapid results coaching. So as you can see, Venita has somewhat of an interest in the brain and humans and how we work. So I'd like to hand over to you, Venita, for your keynote. Welcome.
Thank you, Joanne, for that very generous introduction. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. And what a great week it's going to be. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about this incredibly important topic of conflict. Now, I don't know about you, but something that I've observed in recent times is that there seems to be an increase in conflict in our lives everywhere, not just politically and globally, but particularly in the last 2 years in our interpersonal relationships, which is no surprise given the stress of the pandemic in the last 2 years. And what we do know from the research is when people are stressed, they're feeling vulnerable. And when we're feeling vulnerable, there's an increased susceptibility to conflict. And so today I want to give you some real key skills around how you can stay cool in those heated conversations. I realise that our time is not that extensive. We've got an hour, but in that time, I'm going to give you some well-researched brain-based techniques that are also simple and effective that you can start implementing straight away in your lives in order to achieve a better outcome. So I'm going to start by sharing my slides. And I'm assuming that you can all see these slides. If for any reason you can't, please do let me know. I'm going to start with my favourite quote, and it is, if you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always had. So I'll say that again. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always had. And nothing could be truer than conflict. In conflict, what we tend to do is we follow the same patterns. We do conflict in the same way with the same person. Perhaps we argue with the same person over the same topic time and time again. That's certainly what I see in my mediations. People coming in and saying, oh, we've been arguing about this for years. But the thing about conflict is that if you don't try and do something differently yourself, then nothing will change. And chances are you will spend the rest of your life interacting in the same way that you have possibly when we were younger. And today I'm going to explore some of those patterns, how they arise, and how you can do things differently in order to have a different conversation when you're in conflict. Believe it or not, I did not start off my life wanting to be a conflict specialist. I grew up as a little girl wanting to be a princess, but I quickly realised that that wasn't going to be the case. So I then became a lawyer, and I've spent almost 2 decades as a lawyer working in large corporate organisations. And in that time, I realised that even though I was working with hundreds of people across diverse cultures, backgrounds, experiences and skills, there was a common thread. And that common thread was that most of us did not have effective conflict resolution skills. And in fact, I could probably say that I didn't know or meet anyone in that time that had actually had any formal training in conflict management. And this was a problem because not only as a lawyer do you deal with conflict, your client's conflict every day, but you also in the workplace become very observant of conflict in workplaces. And when we have conflict in workplaces, we know that that infiltrates throughout teams, throughout organisations. It affects productivity, it affects motivation. And so 10 years ago, I decided to launch myself into the world of conflict, not only spurred on by what I had seen in the corporate world, but also spurred on from my own personal life. 10 years ago, I had a marriage breakdown myself, and I decided it was a good time to really launch into personal development. I'd always been interested in personal development, but this time I had a specific focus on conflict. And so I became a mediator, and I thought that if I did my diploma of mediation that I would get all the answers I needed. Well, it certainly gave me some answers, but more than anything, it gave me a lot of questions. And I decided there was a lot more to conflict than what we see on the surface. I've spent the last 7 years studying the intersect between conflict and neuroscience, how our brain works in conflict, why it works like that, what kind of simple skills can I condense with all that research to give something to people that's actionable, that's easy to understand and implement in their lives straight away. And as a result, I now train in conflict resilience in corporates, and I'm also a professional coach. Now, let's get our fingers working. Research tells us that when we're engaged in these presentations, we learn more, we retain more. So I'm going to ask you to pop in the chat, what is the first word that comes to mind when you think of conflict? Just the first word. Lean in, pop in the chat, because the more you lean in today, the more you'll actually get out of the session and the more chance there is of you remembering what you've learned down the track. So let's have a look at some of these answers. We have stress. We have stress again, discomfort. We have stress again, third time. Nightmare, absolutely. Childhood, avoidant. And as we can see from these answers, they're not surprising, because when it comes to conflict, there is a real negative connotation. And the reason is this, because the impact of conflict in our lives is real. Having conflict in our lives, particularly unresolved conflict, can lead to a range of emotional and physical symptoms in our body. There's inbuilt resentment, there's anxiety, there's disconnection. In the workplace, we have job dissatisfaction, reduced focus and frustration. From a physical point of view, this can also present in physical symptoms such as sleep problems, stomach problems, you name it, back problems, headaches. And I've got news for you. If you think that you don't have conflict because you're not having expressed conflict and perhaps you're avoiding it and putting things under the carpet, it can be just as harmful to you, if not more harmful. And certainly a lot of the clients that I coach, in particular, tend to be women that avoid conflict and have done so for a long time, thinking that it's okay, but realizing at some point in their life that the more they avoid conflict, the more they have inbuilt resentment, and your body and the energy of your body, it just seeps in, and it's just in every part of you. And even though you don't realize that at the time, all that internal resentment and overwhelm and stress can present itself in so many ways, not to mention how dysfunctional it can be to our relationships. I truly believe, after having done all this research and studying over the several years, I truly, truly believe that our ability to deal effectively with conflict in our lives is the key ingredient to having happier relationships and being able to live our lives to the fullest. Let's look at some of the research to even back that up. Global research done shows that 85% of people have had to deal with conflict at work in some way. Now, this is a global study across various industries. So think about the implications of this. 85% of us have to deal with conflict at work in some way. And, you know, I can tell you from my coaching business that I actually think the figures are possibly a lot higher than that. 67% have avoided a colleague at work because of conflict. So when we think about that, that's mind-blowing. 2/3 of us have spent our time avoiding someone at work that we don't get along with. And the impact on that is huge, because really when you come to work, we should be coming to work clean slate and focusing on our creativity, on our productivity, and having this over our heads or in our body is not the way to be productive and happy at work. But the good news is that training has shown remarkable results. And so formal conflict skills training has shown in 95% of people researched that it actually helped them, with 85% of people actually reporting that after receiving conflict training, they became more proactive and they took things less personally. I mean, that's huge, isn't it? So that's why I now do what I do. Now, if we try to link that into the topic of today, which is conflict resilience, let's have a think about what resilience means in the context of conflict. And this is one of my favorite cartoons. And I do realize that this cartoon can be taken to interpret different things like diversity and so forth. But for the purpose of today, I'm going to use it to have a discussion and explore with you this topic of conflict resilience. So what we have here is a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. And then we've got the round peg with its arms around its waist. And isn't that what we do in conflict sometimes? We feel really self-righteous. We put our arms around our waist or behind our heads, or we roll our eyes. And so this round peg is saying, you're a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. And the square peg is saying, no, I'm a square peg trying to get out of a round hole and I'm friggin' stuck. So if we look at this, let's have a look at some non-resilient ways that the square peg can deal with this difficult situation. Some non-resilient ways is the square peg can turn around to the round peg and say, well, you know, this is all your fault. For whatever reason. I mean, that's what we do in conflict, isn't it? We blame other people. It's our easiest and most instinctive reaction to blame others. It can blame the round peg for not helping it. It can even blame the person who made the whole round instead of square. And, you know, what the heck? I mean, it can even blame the person that made the square peg square in the first place. And again, I often see this in my coaching clients. You know, we blame our upbringing, our parents, our generational issues. And whilst we will unpack a bit later that they do have an impact on us in terms of who we are, that is, sitting in that position of blame actually does keep us stuck. And when we are stuck, we're stuck in conflict and we can't find a future-focused way to resolve and find solutions. We just get stuck. So they're the non-resilient approaches. But let's explore some resilient approaches that this little square peg can make. The square peg can decide to say to the round peg, okay, look, we're going to be stuck together for a really long time on this building project. How about we collaborate and brainstorm and find some solutions to help me get out of this round hole? That's one approach. Another approach is the square peg might say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm actually going to try and figure this out myself for a bit longer. And it can try and figure it out, but without expressing its anger and blame. Or the square peg might say, hey, I'm actually going to try and find out whether I can make this round hole square so that I can fit into it. Or it might even decide to change its shape. We think it can't be done, but hey, stranger things have happened in our world with technology. So the square peg may actually say, I'm going to try and change my shape so I can fit into that hole. Or I may learn from this and next time never approach a round hole again. So when we look at these examples, we start drawing out some concepts. And when we look at resilience, I believe there are three key components to resilience. And these are some common definitions we find out there. One is that we are resilient when we know how to bounce back from adversity, from disappointment, from failure, and from setback. So we bounce back. So the square peg in this situation, after having a hard day of trying to fit into that hole, will the next day kind of go, okay, well, that was a bad experience, but I learned and I'm going to move on from the whole thing. No grudges, no one's fault, I've learned. Or it might decide to adopt some adaptive qualities, and it might decide to say, hey, I'm going to adapt to this situation. I'm actually not going to try and fit into round holes anymore. It was too painful, it didn't work. I'm just going to grow and move on from that. Or the square peg might decide to bounce forward, and this is my single favourite definition of resilience. Bouncing forward means we not only recover from the setback and adapt to the circumstances, but we go that step further. And that step further is that we grow, we learn, and we then are able to implement those learnings in our life. And that is the most powerful way to be resilient. And so I've thought long and hard around this issue of conflict resilience and what a definition of conflict resilience is. And to me, and the work and the research that I've done, this is where it all lands. Conflict resilience is the ability to bounce forward from conflict with valuable self-reflective insight. And we can again see those three elements in this definition. The first being our ability to bounce forward. If we don't bounce forward from conflict, what we are doing is we're stuck in the past. And so the difference in that example of the square peg is that tomorrow's a new day. It's no longer trying to work out how to get out of that round hole. But if that square peg keeps that resentment and that anger and that feeling of injustice inside itself, that's going to present into a whole heap of problems down the track. So it's our ability to bounce forward. The The second element is to have self-reflective insight. And again, the key word here is self. In the example we just gave with the square peg, if the square peg decided that its biggest insight was that the round peg should have helped it, or no one should have put that round hole there, that's not self-reflective insight. Self-reflective insight is recognizing that I'm a different shape and I'm going to work out what I'm going to do with my shape moving forward and what changes I can make so that I'm not in the same position again. And valuable insight is also another key component, because self-reflection can come in two ways. The first is valuable and the second is self-critical and negative. If that square peg comes out of the situation and its only insight is that I'm square, I'll always be square, there are so many things I can't do with my life, this is terrible, why didn't I do this and why didn't I do that? That's very self-critical and it can be very disarming emotionally. However, valuable insight is being able to say, okay, well, that didn't work. Next time, I'm going to do it differently. And that's what I'm here to tell you today, how to do things differently when you're in conflict to build up your conflict resilience muscle. Over the years, I've had to think about what elements comprise conflict resilience. How can I put it in a teachable model so that when I do presentations and workshops, people are able to understand the research behind it in a way that's easy and a way that's easy to implement. And I've come up with 5 key categories, and we won't have time in the time available, obviously, to go through all of them. But we're going to focus today on the first one, which is self. The other outcomes there are the second one, which is outcome. So that's the ability to train our brain to stay focused on an objective, mutual outcome so that we don't get sidetracked in difficult conversations. The third one is our ability to take active listening even further into energetic listening, where we're able to listen to the energy of the room and to the messages that people are not saying, including their body language. The fourth one, which is vibe, talks about our ability to interpret body language, facial gestures, hand gestures, and again, to be really present in that moment, to be able to connect with people. And our fifth one is empathy, which is our ability to not only be empathetic, but to do it in a way where it's cognitive empathy, particularly as professionals, because if we don't do that, we can quickly become burnt out. But again, for the purpose of today, we're going to be focusing on the first one, which is self. Self has various components to it, which I'm going to touch on all of them today. But in particular, I'm going to really focus on our ability to self-regulate. Because here's the thing, right? In all these years of research and training, I could easily put up a sheet of things to do and how to do conflict better. And I'm aware that there are a lot of people out there, very well-deserving people that do that. But the thing is that if you cannot self-regulate your emotions in conflict, then all that stuff will go out the window. And this is why the training that I do really is focused on self-reflective insight and brain-based techniques, because without regulating your emotions, you can't go that step further. You might be able to do it the first or second or third time, but if you're not aware of your emotions and you're not aware of your capacity and your ability to regulate them, then you won't be able to do any other conflict skills and you'll be really stuck. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Now let's have a very high level and basic view of our brain. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I'm just going to talk about 2 parts of our brain that I'd like you to keep back of mind, because I'll come back to them as I talk about self-regulation. The first part is called the prefrontal cortex. And sometimes this is referred to as your CEO of your brain. So if you think of a CEO in an organization, they're responsible for doing a lot of organizing, a lot of decision-making, a lot of evaluating, a lot of planning, and a lot of problem solving. And your prefrontal cortex works in exactly the same way. It takes up a lot of our energy, but it's a place where we do our high-level conscious thinking. It's a place where we do reading, where we do maths, where we do crosswords, where we do planning. So as you could imagine, This is the part of the brain that we need to have turned on when we're in conflict. But unfortunately, when we're in conflict, I'll show you later why this is the first part of the brain to become impaired and to actually prevent us from accessing that logic and that problem solving that we need to have. So that's our prefrontal cortex. And the second part of our brain is the limbic system. And there's been a lot of debate in neuroscience in recent times around the types of networks that are within the limbic system. But suffice to say that for the purpose of today, the only thing we do need to know that is agreed without doubt in the neuroscience industry is that there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. In fact, they're two almond-shaped parts. And the amygdala is the part of our brain that's responsible for detecting whether there's threat in our lives or whether there's reward. So threat would be situations that present danger to us and may cause us harm. And reward are situations that make us feel good. For example, when we feel good because we feel like we're part of a team, or we feel like we belong, or someone gives us a positive statement. And so the amygdala is scanning not only every minute, but every second of the day. It's a very non-conscious thing. You're not aware it's happening, but it's how our brain keeps us safe. So the prime role of our brain is to keep us alive and to keep us safe. And the amygdala is the network in our brain that does this. It's scanning all the time. It's scanning through all our senses, and it's actually taking, believe it or not, millions of bits of data every minute to just work out, is there any threat in your environment? Are you okay? Or do you need help? And what happens is when the amygdala senses that there's a threat in our environment, it gets activated. So look at the amygdala as like your body's alarm system. When the amygdala senses something in your environment that's threat, what it does is it gets activated. And when it gets activated, it secretes chemicals into our brain and into our body. And they're our stress hormones that I'm sure you've all heard of before. They're adrenaline and they're cortisol. And when this happens, when the amygdala is activated, it then gives these stress hormones into our body, and it sends a message to our brain and to our body that we are in a fight or flight response. And you may know this as fight, flight, or freeze, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It doesn't matter really for the purposes of today. We're going to keep it simple and we're going to call it fight or flight. Now, why does it do this? Again, it does it to keep us alive and to keep us safe. Because if you think of early cavemen days, this is a very primitive part of our brain. So when you think of early cavemen days and you're about to be attacked by a wild beast, so your body is saying, okay, at this point in time, you don't need your prefrontal cortex. What you really do need is you need a lot of those stress hormones. We need to increase your heart rate. We need to increase your blood flow to your muscles because we're trying to give you more energy. We're trying to give you stronger muscles. And that's why we're increasing our blood sugar. You experience rapid breathing. All your senses are on hyper alert. Even your pupils are dilated because your body has sent you into a fight or flight response with good reason and with good intention. It's trying to put all its energy into your physical body so that you can either fight this wild beast or so that you can run as fast as you can to save yourself and be safe. But what's interesting and what's been absolutely mind-blowing is the research that we've been able to do in the last decade, where we've been able to, do MRIs on people's brains in real time and to discover that our brain has the same automatic fight or flight response when we experience social threat. Now, what's social threat? Well, social threat can be feeling like someone's going to verbally attack you, like those photos. Social attack can be as simple as your manager walking into your room and saying, I need to give you feedback. And suddenly you go, your whole body and your chest, you can feel your heart beating, and it doesn't even have to be a real threat. It can be a perceived threat. And what we mean by that is if you're storing memories or emotions or unresolved conflict with someone in your life, the mere fact that you see them again can send you into this state of fight or flight. I mean, isn't that just incredible to know that so much of this happens inside our mind? Our brain is doing it in an effort to keep us safe. But the problem is that when we go into a fight or flight, this happens. Our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain I spoke to you, we need to be to resolve conflict, it's being compromised. We experience cognitive decline. There is less ability for us to have that logic and to be problem solving and evaluating the situation. And what happens is we experience overwhelming emotions, we experience anger. And in that state of mind, when you've got an amygdala hijack response, you've got very little self-reflection, very little empathy, and very little ability to understand someone else's perspective. Have you ever been in a situation where you've been in conflict and you've said something, and at the time you honestly believed it to be true, and you said it with all your heart, but the next day you woke up and you thought, oh gee, I really wish I hadn't said that, or I really wish I hadn't done that. So when we're in amygdala hijack, we have the propensity to demonstrate irrational behaviours and have these overwhelming emotions. And guess what? We're not aware of it. It takes a few seconds. So it's not like you get some warning for half an hour that you can think about. It just happens automatically. And it happens to all of us. And here's the thing, sometimes, people say to me, oh, you're so lucky because you're a mediator and you must have the most peaceful and calm life and you must never have conflict in your life. Well, I'm here to tell you, and to be totally vulnerable, that, I have 3 children. So of course there are times that I experience that heightened emotion. I mean, I'm only human. The difference is that I'm aware of it, like I'm going to show you now how to become aware of it, and I know how to regulate myself when it does happen, and that is what you will gain from today as well. But let's again get our fingers working and just pop in the chat. Have you ever experienced an amygdala hijack during conflict? Can you think of a time where you've been in that conflict situation? Just, you don't have to tell us the situation, just put a Y for yes, and let me know, have you ever been in that situation where you've had a fight with someone? It might have been 10 years ago, it might have been yesterday, and after that you've kind of gone, yeah, I don't know that was my best work. I could have done a lot better. And here we go, we've got some Ys coming through, a lot of Ys. Thank you for leaning in and being honest, because I actually believe that, all of us have experienced this. So the thing to do now is to find out how we can either prevent it from happening or how we can calm ourselves down when it does happen. Here is the $1 million question for all of us today. How do we stay cool during heated conversations? How do we bring ourselves down to that space where we can access our prefrontal cortex, where we're not saying things that we're going to live to regret later on? And what I've done is I've grouped this into 3 categories just to make it really simple and easy to understand. The categories are, I'm going to give you some strategies on what to start doing, and then I'm going to give you some strategies on what to keep doing, because believe it or not, there are some things that you are doing very right, and we want you to keep doing those things. And then I'm going to tell you some things that you need to stop doing if you're doing them, because they're simply not helpful. So let's look at our first strategy of what we need to start doing. And in order to understand this, we need to understand the cycle that we're in when we have heated conversations. And the cycle looks something like this. When someone says something to us in conflict, it's normal that we're going to feel attacked. And our normal instinctive reaction of all humans is that when we feel attacked, we need to defend ourselves, yeah? And we do this often unknowingly. What we do is we launch a counterattack with the easiest way we know how to do it. And these are patterns that have developed in childhood on the playground. We blame the other person or we get angry. And so it might sound like something like this. I feel attacked. My natural instinct is to go straight into that counterattack and say to someone something like, oh, well, you can talk. Well, you don't do much better. Or what about what you did yesterday or last week or last year? And that is simply a natural mechanism that we have as humans. A natural instinct is to defend ourselves. But what happens is, the problem is when we launch this counterattack is that the other person then feels attacked themselves. And of course, their natural instinct is to counterattack us back. And of course, this goes on and on and on. And from a high level, when we look at it, it's hard to understand why, as intellectual human beings, we actually think that by attacking someone else verbally, that it's going to solve the problem. Because when we think about it from a conscious intellectual point of view, really, how does blaming someone else ever help a situation? I mean, I know at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, we're trying to get them to go, hey, you're actually right, Venita. I did act like a complete jerk. It was, partially, if not all, my fault. But I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. So in a heated conversation, what we need to do is to step out of that cycle. Someone has to step out of this cycle. Otherwise, we're going to go round and round in circles. And that's what we hear as mediators. We hear people that have been stuck in this circle for years. And then they come into our office and say, look, can you fix it in half a day? Can you fix it in a day? Well, actually, I don't think I can. I mean, yes, I can help you walk out with an agreement. And most people do walk out of mediation with an agreement. But I'm not so sure that when you're faced with the same problem, you're going to be able to deal with it. So someone has to step off that cycle. And that someone, I'm going to put it to you, has to be you guys, because you're here today. You're here to learn and you're here to do things differently. So this is how I'm going to encourage you to step out of your cycle. And here are 3 techniques. And the first one is self-awareness. Why do we need that? Because when you have that self-awareness, this is your first step. Because believe it or not, we don't all get triggered by the same thing. We might think we do, but something that triggers me does not trigger one of my friends. So we need to be aware of when we're triggered and why we're triggered. Really, it comes down to who am I and why am I? And when we answer those 2 questions of who am I and why am I, we're 50% of the way there to understanding the types of things that trigger us and to being able to control them. We need to be aware of these triggers from the outset because, what I'm going to encourage you to do is to be aware of when is the first time you have that trigger. Oftentimes what happens in conflict is people trigger us early on. So a colleague might make a statement or your partner might make a statement and we don't want to make a big deal. We don't want to cause a fuss at work. We don't want to cause a fuss at home. And we think we've let it go. But what happens is it builds up and it builds up and it builds up and it eventuates into this heated conversation where no one has any control over their emotions. So in order to be aware of our triggers, obviously in the time available to us, I'm going to try and cover as much as I can. But, there are clients that, I work with for 5 or 6 sessions before they can actually truly unpack their triggers. The individual triggers are different for all of us. And once we unpack our triggers, we then go to the next step, which is working out what are our patterns? What are the patterns that we show when we're in conflict? And research shows that these patterns can be broken up into constructive patterns, so the good things, and into destructive patterns. And what we want to do is be aware of these patterns so that we can keep doing the good stuff and get rid of the bad stuff that's not serving anyone. So let's have a little bit of a discussion around our conflict patterns. Our conflict patterns largely start from young. They really, really do. And here's the thing, they're not necessarily intentional because very few of us ever did conflict skills training at school or at university or at any point in our adult lives. So we carry over those same patterns that we had as little kids into our adult relationships. And the reason for this is because most of our conflict patterns are inherited. Sometimes they're inherited through social conditioning. So as I mentioned earlier, I coach a lot of women, and the social conditioning for little girls often is that, be nice, be polite, speak nicely. And when that happens, we may have gotten the message in our childhood that it's better to stay polite and to stay quiet, hence why a lot of women avoid conflict. It might not even be because you're a woman. I also coach men. And in fact, there are men that I coach that have reported that the reason why they avoid conflict, what they've been able to unpack over time through our sessions, is because they had a very aggressive sibling, perhaps an older brother, perhaps a father. And the message they got in their childhood is that it's actually not safe to speak up. I'm actually safer to be polite, to be nice, to get people's approval. And then they get into these dysfunctional relationships. And, you know, what we know is often they attract that same kind of person that they had that conflict with when they were young. And they get into relationships which are very dysfunctional. And suddenly they find themselves partnered with a high conflict person. Because of course they're going to do that. A high conflict person is very rarely going to partner with another high conflict person. That's not going to work, is it? So they may partner with an avoidant person. Or perhaps, on the other hand, the message you got growing up was that you had to be really loud to be heard. Maybe you were one of these toddlers that really went around being aggressive, shouting, throwing toys, biting. Perhaps as a teenager, you became more sophisticated and started slamming doors, stonewalling your parents. And perhaps these same patterns are the ones that you are now displaying in your relationships. And I also want to add that your patterns are not necessarily the same with everyone. So I coach a lot of people where at work they're able to stick up for themselves, but not so much so in their personal lives with their children or their partner or their mother-in-law. And on the other hand, I also coach people that have got the capacity to really stand up for themselves and deal with conflict at work, but at home it's a different story. They feel like they don't have a voice. So either way, these are patterns that we have and patterns that we need to really recognise. And of course, I will mention in passing that there are biological and genetic patterns that we also have. And there are people with diagnosed personality disorders that display high conflict behaviours. So let's have a think and lean in again into the chat, because the more you lean in, the more you'll learn and the more you'll remember. Pop into the chat just a Y for yes or an N for no. Did you have a good role model for dealing with conflict growing up? So just a simple Y for yes or an N for no. We don't need any details. Just have a think. Do you think you had a great role model growing up of how to deal with conflict? And let's have a look at some of our answers. We've got some Ys, which is amazing. That's actually a very large amount of Ys. Normally, a lot of these responses are a no. And then we do also have some no's. But it's really about being aware of those patterns and what you can keep and what you can let go. When we look at the research done by the Eckerd College shows us that at work at least, there are 9 triggers, 9 hot buttons. In other words, there's 9 situations which really, really trigger us in conflict. And they're these kind of people, these kind of personalities really trigger us. So remember earlier I said we need to be aware of our triggers early on. So we're going to now turn our minds to what could be your triggers. And I'm going to ask you to have a think while I go through these. Just one. I just want you to choose one type of personality that really triggers you in conflict and then share it in the chat. Sometimes people ask me, but don't they all trigger us? Well, the answer is actually no. Because, for example, someone that's overly analytical will never trigger me. I'll welcome it. I could be in a room with someone overly analytical and have a conversation over one topic for 9 hours. In fact, it drives me. It doesn't trigger me. Someone that micromanages, yes, that may trigger me. I like to work autonomously with a team around me. But other people are quite happy to be micromanaged. I deal with plenty of clients who actually say to me they just want to go to work and they just want to do a job. They don't actually want responsibility. So have a think about which one of these and pop into the chat, which one of these types of personalities are your biggest triggers? Are they people who are unreliable, people who are overly analytical, people who are unappreciative, people who are aloof, people that micromanage you, people that are self-centered, people that are abrasive or untrustworthy or hostile? And let's have a look at some of our answers. And thank you for leaning in. You're a great audience. And what we have is we have untrustworthy, we have hostile, we have unappreciative, we have unreliable. And as you can see, there's no pattern forming. We have another unreliable, another unappreciative, another hostile, an abrasive, a self-centered, and another one. We've got a question from Robin. Where does mockery or mimicry fit into that? Yes, it could be abrasive, or Robin, it could be someone that's self-centered because you see them as only thinking of themselves and mocking other people. And we have another unreliable and another hostile. So you can see from these results that we are all very different. And I would really encourage you after this session or during the week to have a think about the origins of that. Why is it that those kind of people trigger you? Now, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is have a think about where you feel the trigger. So you may be able to answer that now, or you may be able to do it during the week. And I really encourage you to do this exercise because we all feel it differently. When the amygdala secretes those stress hormones into our body, some people feel it in their head. I have clients that say my head feels hot. Some people feel it in their stomach and bowel area. I have clients that say that they straight away feel really sick in the stomach. Other people experience the rapid breathing or the heart pounding. Me personally, I feel a really tight chest. Other people feel sweaty palms or goosebumps. So just have a think of that. Do the exercise during the week. Draw yourself out a gingerbread man and write where is your first trigger, because that's your first clue to knowing that you've been triggered and knowing what you need to do to calm down. And that's these tasks here. This is what you need to do when you experience that trigger. These are 4 simple techniques that you can start doing straight away. And there's brain science behind them, which I'm going to touch on, but I'm going to give you, in the time we have available, these 4 quick but very effective strategies. The first is when you know that you've experienced this amygdala reaction, you need to actually recognize that you have no logic at that point, or very little cognitive capacity, very little. So in order for you to sit in that space when you've been triggered and to try and make decisions and try to solve problems, it's only going to go one way. It's not going to work. So when you feel that you have been so triggered that you can feel your chest pounding or your stomach and you feel sick, you need to either delay responding or actually remove yourself for a minimum of 20 minutes. You know, it's not a 2-minute thing. It takes a while for your body to get the message that it's not in threat. So the longer, the better is the message. If you can't remove yourself, let's say you're a mediator and you're feeling triggered for whatever reason, the best thing you can do is oxygenate. The research tells us that when we enter into slow, deep breathing, that actually reduces our amygdala activity. So it's sending a message to our brain that I'm not in threat anymore. I can calm down, I can stop releasing these hormones, and I can go back to normal. So slow, deep breathing is something you can do at any time. No one even knows you're doing it. But when you do that slow, deep breathing, and it's got to come really deep from your tummy, not from your chest, because that's shallow. That's stress breathing. Really deep in your tummy, and really breathe in and out, and keep doing that because it's dampening the impact of your amygdala when you do that. The third thing you can do is we want to interrupt that survival thinking. We want to interrupt that pattern of I'm in threat. This person's attacking me. There's no way out. I can't do anything about it. And you can actually do that in a number of ways. One is you can change scenery. You can go for a walk. You can go for exercise. And when you do that, it's like a pattern interrupt. And so your brain goes, okay, you know, I'm going to think about it in a different way. You can even ring up someone and talk to them about it. I mean, how many times has that happened to you where you feel you're so stuck in a problem, you can't see the forest from the trees, and yet you pick up the phone, you have a conversation with someone, and suddenly you see things differently. What we're trying to do here as well is trying to kind of force our prefrontal cortex to work. So remember how I said that our prefrontal cortex is responsible for all our high-level cognitive thinking. When you do reading or writing, or you do a crossword, then what happens is you're actually kind of forcing that part of your brain to work. And the more it works, the less you'll be in that limbic amygdala response. And, you know, the fourth way for all the mediators listening today, of course, you know, we know this, emotions are contagious. So when you're able to speak in a really calm, low and slow voice, as long as it's not patronizing, yeah, but when you're able to do that, you're able to bring down the energy in the room. Emotions are contagious, and there are mirror neurons in our brain that indicate that to be true. So it's a research-based fact that if someone is angry, the same neurons can fire off in your brain and you can actually feel angry too. So what you're wanting to do is step off that cycle and be calm in order for that person to also be calm. And the third really great strategy is to set some boundaries. Again, yes, a topic on its own, but just very briefly for us, particularly when you're dealing with a high conflict person or a high conflict personality, it's really important to clearly communicate boundaries and to communicate them calmly. Because when you do that, you're setting boundaries for the conversation. The boundaries have to be sustainable and they have to be realistic. So there's no point saying to your partner, you know, if you continue to talk like that, I'm going to leave you. And if you intend on doing that, go for your life, but make sure you enforce that. Because what happens is oftentimes, we do this with kids a lot too, when I'm coaching my clients, and they'll say that to their kids things like, you know, if you continue to do that, I'm going to cancel your birthday party, or Santa's not going to come. Is Santa really not going to come? Of course Santa's going to come. Santa comes every Christmas. So don't communicate boundaries that you're not going to enforce. It's really hard to enforce boundaries, but we need to do what Brené Brown says. We need to choose courage over comfort, because the more we do it and the faster we enforce our boundaries, the less chance of you being in that heated conversation where you've hung on for so long that you're at the point of no return and you completely flip your lead. It's too late. So this is really important. The second thing I promised I would show you is what to keep doing. And this is going to be really easy for all of you, because you are here today to learn about doing things differently. You've chosen to take time out from your busy day and to prioritize listening to me talk about conflict resilience. So to me, that means that you're in the category of people that already have curiosity and a growth mindset. So I'm going to encourage you to keep that going. Don't let this be the last webinar you ever go to around conflict resilience. Read. There's so much free information on the internet. Go to other webinars. If you need to be coached, put yourself into 5 sessions and get coached by someone. But really keep that continuous self-reflection going, because the more you know about yourself, the more resilient you will be in conflict. When it comes to other people, stay curious about them. Assume the most generous interpretation you can assume. Don't assume that people are out to get you, because let me tell you, most people do not get out of bed with the specific intention of being a complete a-hole to other people. They really don't. Even if you've got a jerk of a boss, I can tell you that he or she does not wake up in the morning with an intention to be a complete jerk to everyone in their team. They just don't know any better. They just don't have these self-regulation skills. And so when you approach other people from curiosity, it helps you gain a different perspective. So that means asking questions, asking people, you know, tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me a bit more about what's happening. I'm just trying to understand what's happening. When you do that, you immediately lower the negative vibrations in the room, and you're able to stay in that curiosity space. Strategy 3, what to stop doing. And here are 5 things that if you're doing them, I'm going to encourage you to stop doing them. Here they are. Don't ever tell people what you think's wrong with them. It's not helpful. We're all intelligent human beings, and we know that people will not change because we're telling them to. People will only change when there is a reason to change. So don't worry about telling people what you think's wrong with them. Worry about what you can fix in yourself. Don't try and change other people, and don't rush into responding. Because here's the thing, when you're in conflict, other people that don't know how to regulate their emotions are going to throw a whole heap of garbage at you, stuff that's not true, stuff that we now know could be happening just because they're in an amygdala hijack. So don't rush into responding with every little detail. There are certain things that you don't need to respond to. Not everyone is going to like us. That's just the reality. You know, we're not going to spend our lives defending ourselves to other people. We need to have this broader view of conflict, of what can we do to reach resolution. We don't want to absorb people's negative energy, and for goodness sake, do not take things personally when you're dealing with a high conflict personality, because it's not about you. It's really about their reaction. We want to be in a position where we are responding to people rather than automatically reacting. And this is my last and final slide. To really, feel free to take a screenshot of this slide if you want to, and you can add to it. You can add things to it. There are many things we can add to this slide. But in essence and in summary, we can't control other people's actions, feelings, or thoughts. The only thing we can control is how resilient we are in conflict, how we can influence other people by having a calm and measured response. And I'm going to loop back on my last slide to the quote I started with. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always had. And I really, really, truly hope today you have gained a different perspective on conflict. And I hope that you've had even just one takeaway. I know there's been a lot of information, but just one takeaway. I'm going to ask you to share in the chat, what's been your one biggest insight from today? What's the one thing that you are going to do differently the next time you're in conflict to build your resilience muscle? So pop that in the chat, and I'm going to have a look at some of your responses. Let's have a look at what are some responses we've had into the one insight that you've gained from today. So one of the insights that people have had is to remember that emotions are contagious. Thank you for that, Eleni. Eleni, you actually have one of my daughter's names. So thank you, Eleni. Yes, emotions are contagious, and always remember that your role with emotions is to control yours so that you're not then passing on anger, which is only going to make things worse. We've had, let's have a look at some others. My hot buttons, absolutely. Your hot buttons are incredibly important to be aware of what's triggering you and to be aware that it's not the same for everyone. Another insight has been don't rush into responding. Absolutely, that's a great insight. Don't rush. I always say to my corporate clients, a leader is never in a hurry. There's no rush. Tune into your triggers. Absolutely, that's another great insight. And I know that we are going to stop, but I'm just going to look at a couple more. Remain curious. Yes, thank you for that, Claire. That's a great insight, to stay curious. And we've got another one here, taking some deep breaths and identifying your own triggers. Yes, Jennifer, that is the best takeaway that you can take away from this. Bouncing forward. Thank you, Marie, for your response. Absolutely. How do you bounce forward and not get stuck in the past? And a couple more before my time's up. To keep calm when you're triggered. Yes, that's another fantastic one. Thank you, Priscilla. And I think our time is up. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you for being an amazing audience and leaning in and commenting and sharing your insights. That's really valuable. And I wonder whether anyone has any questions, or over to you, Joanne. I haven't left a lot of time for questions, I'm sorry, but if you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat or take yourselves off mute and let us know.
Absolutely. So, looks like Adie's got a question.
Hi, Adie, welcome.
Oh,
no,
no.
Adie's changed her mind. That's okay.
You can use chat to ask the questions, and we'll put that to Venita again. And look, a lot of what you've talked about is some of those strategies to actually take back conscious control over your brain when it tries to go on automatic. I guess, well, you've given us a lot of strategies, but what's just maybe a reminder for people about what's the first step to do when you feel that, whatever you feel in your body?
Yeah, having that understanding is really key. And thank you to those of you that are putting all those lovely comments in the chat as well. If a question does come to mind at some point during the day, feel free to get in touch and ask away. I'm always happy to engage with people after these sessions. I often get people that are in corporate trainings come to me afterwards and say that I didn't really need that for my work, but gee, it really helped in my personal life. I'm now doing things differently and I'm having a different conversation with the people that are close to me. And that's what it's all about. That's why, Joanne, you and I do what we do. In fact, I should probably mention that the Solve Code next year, Joanne and I are very, very excited that we're actually going to launch it as an online course. And, you know, we're both clearly motivated by this passion to change the conversation around conflict. Because what happens is when you have different language and you do things differently, then you're influencing other people in your proximity to do things differently. And I truly believe that when we are able to manage conflict in our lives, it does determine how happy we are in our lives and in our proximity with those people around us.
Yeah, absolutely, Venita. And I should disclose that Venita and I are collaborating on a new course, so online in a community. But really, I guess looping back to the beginning, when people thought the first thought they thought about conflict mostly were negative types of things. So I guess with some of the strategies you've got, you can change those negatives into, you know, excitement, curiosity, opportunity.
Absolutely. You know, and well, this is the whole thing. And I know there are some, you know, TEDx speakers out there that actually their talks are around that conflict is good. It's a bit hard for people to get around that concept that it's a good thing because of the negative connotations, like you just said, Joanne, that we've had all these years. But that's only been because we haven't been dealing with it in an effective way. When we start seeing conflict as an outcome of diversity, that's when things shift, because conflict really is a misalignment of values and a misalignment of how we do things. And this is actually how we grow and learn. You know, we're not all puppets of each other. I mean, that would be a terrible thing if we actually agreed on everything. We would never grow or learn or develop. So that's actually not what we want. That's what we think we want, but that's not what we want. What we actually want, I do believe, as human beings, is to understand other people's perspectives, understand the differences in other people, and help then in return help them understand us. And when we have that alignment and we come from a place of curiosity and trying to understand each other's perspective and each other's values, that's when we've got the beauty of conflict. That's when we're able to share our ideas and not get caught into those conversations where we flip our lids.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Venita. And I'm just mindful of the time. So
yes.
Once again, thank you to you, Venita, for a really inspiring start for us for the conference, and to Linda as well. And also thank you to everyone for attending today's session. We want to say a huge thank you to Mediator Network, who's started the International Mediation Awareness Week, and our team at the Australian Mediation Awareness Week as well. Sponsors, collaborators, volunteers. This is a volunteer program put on by mediators, for mediators and the general public to help raise awareness. So thank you to everyone who's contributed to make this week a success. Please book in for some other events. We've got breakfast or morning networking for mediators, so come along. It's a chance to converse. And likewise, our Meet the Mediator sessions, there's 2 each day, are an opportunity to talk to mediators either in a small group or privately in a breakout room. So don't waste this opportunity. There's also, I've put in the chat the link to the Australian Mediation Awareness Week, which has links through to all of the events to make it easy for you to register. And final thing, we have a global debate which is going to be on Friday, late-ish on Friday for us. So it's about whether the Western model of mediation is a fit for multicultural society. So that should be a really interesting conversation as well. So again, thank you so much, Venita, and everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.